heard first an analysis focused on politico-economic aspects by Claus Offe, and then one focused on historico-conceptual aspect by Bo Stråth, but which otherwise shows strong signs of overlap both in the analysis and in the attempts at pointing towards solutions. Those of you who have attended earlier of these debates will now probably expect me to open the debate between our two speakers, but I think their presentations have been so thought-provoking and also question-provoking that I propose to go immediately to a broader discussion in the audience. Yes, please.
Thank you. Just to get the ball rolling, so to say, I have three questions. One to Professor Offe. It is about the role of the media, of the international media like Financial Times, CNN, Wall Street Journal, and there are many others. Let's say in this process that started in the 80s with this kind of particular thought and ideas, and if you follow CNN, it's not just about Europe, it's spreading the message also to the new Asian markets, as they say, to African markets. Are they just mirroring things that they catch up somewhere? Are they the public relations agents of some dark forces, so to say, as some might suspect? The international banks, the Heuschrecken, as we say in Germany. So what is their role and what is behind that? And are they important? Are they unimportant? And so on. Two questions to Mr. Bo Stråth. I think all of us here are very much knowledgeable about the situation, let's say in Portugal, in Spain, in Catalonia, in Italy, in Greece, and so on. But we have the other side of the European globe, and I guess because of your background, you are quite knowledgeable there. We have Finland on the one hand, we have Sweden, we have Denmark, we have Norway, we have Iceland. Just one hears a lot about Finland being and associated very often to the views that Germany and the Netherlands have. In the past, we know about the welfare state in Sweden, but we know things have changed here. The Swedish voice is not heard very much here. They are not a member of the euro, maybe because of that. Then we have Norway, also not a member of the EU, also not having the euro, but they have oil, and that seems to help. I think the cut downs in their welfare system may not be that drastic as they were in Sweden and maybe also in Finland. I don't know. Then we have Denmark. One does not hear very much about what's going on there and what they think. Then we have Iceland, a very small country at the western fringe, with the breakup of the banks, but they seem to get out of that without international assistance, maybe because through devaluation. So I would like just to explain a little bit what you think about this cosmos in the north. They're all different. And one other thing, because you seem to put some optimism and your hope into the European Parliament, but we just heard this morning there was another conference with the Spanish EU Commissar Almunia in the CEDAW, and people there were very skeptic, like you were, about the prospects for the European elections and the possibility that there may be a Eurosceptic majority after the next elections. And what would that mean? Would that be that would not be a very hopeful sign in your view, I guess? So I would like to maybe to continue a little bit your explanations with these three questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there maybe one or two more questions before we get back to the speakers? Yes, please.
Maybe one question for Professor Offe.
Yeah. Could you wait for the microphone? Just 1 second for the.
So thanks a lot for your presentation. It was as enlightening and as ever. I would like to know, out of the four solutions that you mentioned that we might undertake to counter fight your diagnosis. All of the things you mentioned are things that would be taken at the level of European Union politics. Tax harmonization, the Gini limits to the Gini coefficient, etc. But don't you think that's going to take a hard time to get those, provided political leaders at that elite are very well aligned with the top right axis that you described? I mean, don't you think it's going to be hard to persuade political elites at the European level, at the institutional level, to pursue any of those solutions?
Thank you. One more question, maybe? Yes, please, behind.
A question to Mr. Offe and Mr. Stråth. When you speak about social question, you have never said nothing about the role of enterpriser and trade labor. What is possible to get a good health without the improvement of enterpriser and the trade labor? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's take one more and then we go back to the speakers. Here, please.
Herr Professor Offe, I have a question regarding your solutions and how they relate to the issues you identified. It seems like you made out this crisis and the monetary straitjacket that's been imposed on the EU through the euro, but none of your solutions seem to sort of go in that direction. They're mostly redistributive, and the idea of a Gini coefficient measure, for example, would impose more of a straitjacket on a lot of these countries that seems to contradict your idea that austerity seems to go too much towards the idea of Europe or other countries trying to dictate how countries should run their budget. So if, for example, the Netherlands would exceed their Gini coefficient in some ways, would there then be what you call government by memorandum in order to punish it in some way and get the coefficient down? I mean, is there in what ways do you think that the solutions you propose address the issue of a monetary straitjacket, which seems to be something that would be more addressed to the ECB or the monetary policy of the EU rather than to things like inequality that you propose?
Thank you. Klaus, do you want to respond first? One moment.
Very briefly. Interesting question. Thank you for the media, the role of the media. I think with the exception of the Financial Times, in which I have no shares, but which I still consider the single best European newspapers, and arguably worldwide, competing with the New York Times. This is the rare case where reporting and journalistic comments and analysis takes place outside the frame of a tunnel view, that is, without a frame in terms of national interest or national entities. The perspective of most of our national newspapers, as far as I can tell, is what is Brussels deciding and how does it work for us as a national entity. That is the European point of view, and how the very precarious system that we live in can be stabilized and further developed is something that you find in very few newspapers. The perspective from the point of view of a particular country that this newspaper is, like Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, is supposed to serve. I don't know how it is with El País, but most cases that I know start from the premise that everything needs to be evaluated, not how this European problem can be solved, but how it affects us, and how good it is for us, what Brussels does, or how bad it is for us. So the premise of my analysis, a larger version of which incidentally is available, has become available in Spanish last week, is that the euro is a ticking bomb in the European Union. It drives a wedge into Europe. It counteracts whatever is meant by convergence. It leads to divergence of the losers and the winners and the bystanders, right? As were the not yet euro countries. And that has disastrous political consequences. This is not a sustainable situation. We need to move forward in some way, and you are absolutely right. My proposals are very limited, and they cannot really be a formula, a remedy that solves all the problem. Although you may also argue that once the European Parliament has legitimating power, the problem of imposition of something that looks like foreign rule by the Commission is no longer there. But as one of the other speakers has argued, how realistic is it to assume that the European decision-making processes will result in something that is European in quality rather than the synthesis of national points of view and perspective. I think institution building, as you can see both in the Assemblée Nationale in the French Revolution and in the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention, has always an element of a bootstrapping act. People come together and pull themselves up by their own hair, as it were, to a compromise that is superior to the interests of the participant. This is a pious hope, you may say. But my only argument here is the situation as it is currently evolving, with all the symptoms of disintegration and polarization between winners and losers is so serious that lawmakers, including national governments, may overcome themselves and perform this bootstrapping act of pulling them up by their own hair. This is the only possibility. In view of the alternatives and the destructive processes that we see both at the economic and political level, and the plain immiseration of large parts of the periphery populations, and the growth of precariousness, the growth of unemployment, I think it is not entirely unreasonable to hope and to work for such a institutional rebuilding that will have to strengthen the role of the parliament and also strengthen in the process the role of thinking about Europe in a holistic perspective rather than in a national frame. It is interesting, last remark on this, but to my mind, that the two institutes, the two academic research institutes that do the most fruitful work on Europe are located in Oslo, one of them, and the other one in North Carolina in the United States. These are the experts who do not think in terms of national interest versus other national interests, but they observe the process in a bird's eye perspective, perhaps, and with very challenging results that European parliamentarians would do well to make use of. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus.
Scandinavia, yes. The secret with Scandinavia is that they got their high productivity in historical processes where they had the privilege, or took the privilege, to devaluate their currencies repeatedly. And this is exactly the problem for the southern countries today. The belief in the early 1990s was that the market would just create this equality, so poor would be rich and rich would be a little bit poor. The market will equalize the standards and productivity, wages and everything. This never happened. And therefore, now, and this is exactly why this euro is a ticking bomb, but the southern countries don't have this possibility like the Scandinavian Nordic countries had in historical processes to adjust to the labor cost unit, to the labor productivity and the labor unit cost, so to speak, and devaluate. They have, and this is why the opposite strategy is imposed upon them. Straitjacket, to tighten the belts, there is the two solutions. If there had been a possibility to devaluate, then you could re-establish the balances again in terms of different productivities. And perhaps in a long historical process, some kind of equality would come around. One could create systems where this could be made within the euro with a certain gap, a certain limit of devaluation. The dollar functioned like this, but not for a long time, as we know, but it did it 10 or 15 years. But this is, I think, something which Wolfgang Streeck reflects on, this possibility. But the alternative, if we don't do anything there, is, I think, a national solution, and that will be like the gold standard. If we try to insist like the politicians did in the 1930s, we stick to the gold, then the masses and the social protest will overrule the system. I think this is, as I see it, the only. So then the question is, what could there be in terms of a European solution? And this is also the core of the debate between Streeck and Habermas. And Habermas says then European democracy. But this must be qualified, I think. A European solution, one thing is clear. What most politicians today have in mind when they talk about some kind of a political union, Schäuble in Germany is perhaps the most advanced in his arguments in this direction. It is just the circle in the council and the night meetings in Brussels and the central bank. I think this is delegitimizing in the long run. There must be, if there is a European solution, a clear connection between the European Parliament and the executive and the decision makers in the executive. And this can only be made through a fundamental reform of the whole European Parliament. For the moment, it just functions as a kind of internal power struggle between the Council and the Commission and the Parliament, so to speak. And you saw it now in the struggle about the budget here. The President, Martin Schulz, he tried to establish a kind of position against the two other powers, but at the end he had to unify the whole, to try to find a unified Parliament. My solution would be to go the other way, in much more national Parliament solutions, a struggle in the Parliament. You create a majority through conventional political conflicts between right and left. And then there's a clear establishment what politics is to be made. And then you can command the executive to execute these decisions. This would be, I think, a more democratic solution which could perhaps in the long run help a European solution. But it must also be more flexible here. There must be a transfer of money from the north to the south. Somehow is necessary, like the Marshall Plan was after the war, but it must be under legitimate forms. If not, there will be no legitimacy in the north. This is, I think, my point.
Thank you, Paul. We come to a second round of questions. Yes, please.
Yo soy escritor y lo que voy a decir ahora, lo voy a poner.
This is a really important thing which needs to be done is to ration work, because some people have up to 10 jobs, whereas others are starving. There are people with 8 or 9 jobs. They don't care. And there are people who are evicted because they don't have any job. Franco achieved at least 1 job per household. There was almost full employment. This is what Franco achieved, even though he was a dictator. This is the idea that I'm going to explain in my book. Because a lot of people are laughing at their neighbors because they are evicted, because they cannot pay their apartments, and they are evicted, and people are laughing at them having 8, 9 jobs. You are so smart and you haven't thought about this problem.
Gracias. Are there further comments? Yes, please.
Both of you were talking about the euro as a ticking bomb, if I understand correctly. But if I understand correctly, also both of you are saying we need to stick to the euro. Why are we going to wait for this bomb to explode instead of doing something?
We have to defuse it before it explodes.
Maybe I would like to myself come to a version of that question, because I think clearly in Claus Offe's account, but somewhat similarly also in Bo Straat's account, we are left a bit with a riddle, because if we have to recognize that already from the beginning of the construction of the euro, the insight was widespread that it is a misconstruction, that one embarks on an erroneous way. I think then the question is, or similarly, if the insight had widespread that market economies need to be embedded into social and political institutions and committed to social solidarity, what leads then relatively suddenly in the short term to this disembedding Bo has been talking about, if indeed the knowledge or the insight was so widespread. And that leads back then, that is, so to say, a historical question. Maybe at some point we will have historical analyses about what the debates were when the euro was designed and the expectations on the part of those who participated in designing it. But it also throws then the question back to the present about, as Bo was suggesting explicitly, that there is an abandonment, a loss of knowledge about economic matters that we have in our time, with economists falling silent given the huge mistakes they have made. But then the question is also how we get out of that situation when on the one hand Claus says the insight is there for everyone that the ticking bomb has to be diffused even though it cannot be undone entirely. But what exactly the mechanisms are, I think both of you, I would like to ask you to I would like to push you a bit further on these matters. Maybe Bo, if you want to start responding to this set of questions.
The attempt to diffuse the ticking bomb for the moment is exactly the therapy which is going on with monthly meetings in Brussels and new agreements about new deals and new packages and so on. And this is a momentaneous response, but it is not a solution. That is quite clear. And it might be that this circus can be kept alive for a time. There might be, not least because the more the northern countries invest in terms of commitment, loan commitments in the south, the more expensive it becomes to try to impose something. And the more power the southern countries get to relax the strong rules a little bit and get a little bit of breath room. I think this is what we see in Italy now. They just more or less abandon a bit of the rules which were imposed upon them. And I don't see, I think this is a necessary, but this is not a long-term solution. I think this is not a long-term solution. So the long-term solution must be to somehow democratize this process. And then with democratic instruments to decide on some kind of Marshall Plan or whatever, in the framework of a new economic understanding. If not, it's not, as I say, there is not one economic solution here. It is a whole set. It's a conceptual crisis, a political crisis, and it is the economic crisis. And all these must be developed. And the first thing to do is to work on an economic theory which would make it possible with these transfers within Europe. And then I think a debatable question is if it would be possible to make it to arrange these kind of flexible, moderately flexible exchange rates within the Eurozone. Keeping the euro, but make it possible for some countries to move down. I mean, like the Danes and the Swiss, they have now tied their currencies to the euro, but there you could see easier how they could perhaps moderately adjust it. And this could be one technical solution, which nobody, I don't think that the economists wouldn't, I don't know what they say, but this is steps which could be made to get all of it over into a long-term solution, which would be a euro where we have a fiscal policy worth the name, not making the bank of the European Central Bank director the unofficial Minister of Finance, because the political leaders of Europe don't want that responsibility for the moment. This is one point. They must have politicians who stand up and take the responsibility.
Klaus?
You know, what I'm wondering about is why isn't there a alliance forming, a supranational alliance of the euro losers, putting pressure on the euro winners in order to bring their house in order and to engage into a massive redistribution in their own interests properly understood, in the long-term interest, in their own interest in maintaining a common currency and thereby a common European house, a European Union. Why isn't there such an alliance? Why are the periphery countries fighting for themselves and individually to get concessions from the ruling troika with their memoranda? Why isn't there a concerted action on the part of those who suffer from this serious mistake that has been made for reasons that are well known by now? There is no adjustment capacity to live up to German or Finnish productivity or unit cost of labor, which is the key variable. So why isn't there a demand for compensation for this? How did this whole thing come into being? And the answer is, and future historians will have to tell more about this, that the creation of the euro was a quid pro quo between François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl. Without the giving up the dominant position of the German Bundesbank, you do not get our assent to German unification, right? And we grant you unification, you grant us giving up the Bundesbank and the Deutschmark in exchange for the euro. That was a political deal, as many historians who are writing about this agree today, as it was a political deal to admit Greece to the Eurozone, to the EU in the first place in 1981, which was a basically and obviously nonsensical move. However, if you allow them to join the currency zone, then you will prevent another 1967, namely a military coup in that country. That was the deal that prosperity will lead to these things. Let me conclude by trying to make one point crystal clear as I can make it. We have talked, Bo has talked about reform and austerity and how this these strategies imposed by the Troika destroy everything that we can name fair sharing or fair conditions of social justice, given the income distribution that results from this. The policy of reform in the new sense, or austerity, presumes two steps. One is labor will get cheaper or more easily fired, or has greater difficulties to make successful wage demands or demand social protection, right? So this all favors employers and is contrary to the interests of employees. But the economic argument is, in exchange you get something, namely the next step will be that the cheaper and more flexible and less protected labor will more easily find employment, new employment, right? So you damage the interests of workers, but you promote them at the same time. That is the beauty, the charm of the neoliberal argument. However, what we see is that the first part of the argument works in almost sadistic ways, whereas the second one does not work. These people do not get, although they are much cheaper in terms of total wage costs, they do not get re-employed because the key term here is business confidence that setting up a new enterprise is not in place. The expectation is an ongoing recession or stagnation rather than work. No entrepreneur in his right mind will use the cheap labor that is now available for setting up a new business. Given the situation that the very cheap money that the banks can get from the European Central Bank is not really spent on credits for investment, because banks know that, again, business confidence, that there is no reason to assume a boom being around the next corner. Therefore, there is a high risk involved. Italian entrepreneurs pay 6 to 7% for credit that the banks get for almost zero, right? Because the risk that the bank calculates they will incur when giving that is so great, because the expectation of growth is not there. This negative expectation is self-fulfilling, and austerity leads to further shrinkage of the economic process rather than expansion. Saving on wage costs is not only socially disastrous for those affected, it is also economically counterproductive, because effective demand is taken out of the market. The gentleman who has just left but asked the question about the volume of labor standing in line waiting for employment, right, is a very, very important question. And the answer is that, it's little known, but it is one of the most worrying data that I have seen in a long time. The number of suppliers of labor power, that is, on the number of workers competing with each other on a global scale, has grown since 1990 by the factor of 100%. It has doubled. And that under conditions of stagnation, very low growth or stagnation, and ongoing productivity increases. So the expansion of supply and the stagnation of demand for labor cannot but lead to a deterioration of the wage situation and the economic situation, even in the European Union, but worldwide, including the BRIC countries. The European Union would make itself the most popular invention in recent history if it could stem that tide, for instance, through a drastic measure of work time reduction. I mean, people speak about the 21 hours a week for the 21st century, that it may sound utopian, but a rigid reduction of the labor supply seeking gainful activity, employment, is one of the items that I would add to the list that I have mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. Bo also wanted to come back to that question.
No, I very much agree on this, but I had a specific an answer which I forgot. I had noted it, but I forgot it. What do we do with those skeptical to Europe if they get now elected to the European Parliament? Yes, I think that we should welcome to get them into the Parliament, because that could be an instrument to politicize the whole parliament. I think the parliament for the moment is too depoliticized. It should be much more clash about values in the parliament, and that is the only way, instead of having them in 27 countries, 28 countries now, all around trying to tearing the whole union apart from their perspectives. Get them into there. I think that is the only solution. And it is not easy. It's not easy anyhow. The situation is dramatic. The situation is more dramatic than many want to believe. But still, I think that is the only solution, to give them a voice and then confront them in the parliament and talk about alternatives. And talking about alternatives also, of course, means to listen. Is there anything in this skepticism? Do they have some point somewhere? Or is it just nonsense what they are saying? I don't think so. I think it is well worth to take them seriously.
Thank you very much, Bo. I think in his earlier remark, Claus Offe, talking about conditions for loans to business, came back in a very concrete way to a theme Bo Stråth had been addressing earlier, namely the diminishing of the horizon of expectations, in the very concrete sense of expectations of growth, that seems to confirm the broader sense in which Bo was talking, that there is a crisis in that sense, that the horizon of expectations one can have not only for solving this particular crisis, but for future social, economic and political development in Europe and the world is just diminished at the current moment. And I think also the skepticism from the audience to the proposals both of our speakers have made shows that while the skepticism is well taken, I think, all proposals can either be seen as too small and deficient or not realistic. At the same time, what we probably exactly need is a wider horizon of expectations and the political imagination, which then would be needed to create the political action capacity, I think, which Klaus in particular has underlined. Time is advanced. I think I would like to do only two things. First of all, thank our two speakers and the audience for a very intense and lively discussion. And second, to mention that the next of our discussions will take place in 5 weeks from now on the 21st of October. And we will discuss there, and maybe we find new horizons, responses to the European crisis from below, looking at current social and political protest movements and the way they address the crisis. Thank you very much to everybody.